In 2000, Starbucks walked into Australia with the same playbook that had already conquered dozens of countries. Familiar green branding, an oversized menu, and the confidence of a company that had never really failed to translate its formula anywhere it landed. By 2008, less than a decade later, Starbucks had closed 61 of its 87 Australian stores, admitting to $105 million in accumulated losses. Today, we're mapping out exactly how one of the most successful retail brands on earth misread an entire country's coffee culture so badly, so quickly, that it became one of the most studied retail failures in modern business history. Welcome to Faulty Blueprint. Let's open the file. The first problem started long before Starbucks ever opened a single Australian store, and it comes down to timing that Starbucks itself simply never accounted for. Australia's coffee culture wasn't young or underdeveloped when Starbucks arrived. It had been maturing since the mid-1900s, when waves of Italian and Greek immigrants brought authentic espresso culture into the country following the Second World War, embedding café culture into daily Australian life for roughly half a century before Starbucks ever showed up. By the time Starbucks entered the market in 2000, Australia's independent café scene wasn't a gap waiting to be filled. It was already a fully mature, fiercely loyal ecosystem one industry experts estimated was worth more than $6 billion annually by 2018, built entirely around small, independently owned shops rather than any dominant chain. That existing café culture ran on something Starbucks' entire global business model was never built to replicate: personal relationships. As one industry analyst put it, Australian cafes were born out of an Italian tradition of meeting a friend and knowing your local barista by name, functioning as a genuine neighborhood meeting place rather than a transactional coffee stop. Starbucks, by contrast, arrived with an American approach to coffee, one built around consistency, speed, and treating coffee as a commodity meant to caffeinate you quickly on the way to somewhere else. That fundamental philosophical mismatch, personal ritual versus standardized commodity, sat at the center of everything that followed. The menu itself became an immediate, tangible symptom of that larger mismatch. Starbucks brought its standard American lineup directly into the Australian market, with minimal adaptation, leaning heavily on large, sweet, syrup-based drinks that simply didn't match local taste. As one Australian business analyst explained at the time, Australian consumers didn't want a coffee that came in enormous portions loaded with sugar. They wanted something more refined, more precisely made, closer to a traditional Italian-style espresso than an oversized American specialty drink. On top of that mismatch, Starbucks was also charging noticeably more than the local, independently owned cafes Australians already trusted, meaning customers were being asked to pay a premium for a product that tasted less sophisticated than what they could already get closer to home, from a barista who actually knew their name and their usual order. Then there was the expansion strategy itself, which multiple industry analysts have since pointed to as perhaps the single most damaging decision Starbucks made in the entire market. Rather than entering cautiously and building trust gradually, the way most successful international entries do, Starbucks expanded rapidly, opening dozens of stores across the country in a short window, essentially betting that brand recognition alone would be enough to build a loyal customer base before Australians had any real opportunity to develop genuine appetite for the brand. One Gartner research analyst specializing in consumer industries later noted that Starbucks launched too rapidly and simply never gave Australian consumers the time or reason to actually want what they were selling. That rapid expansion meant Starbucks was carrying the overhead of dozens of underperforming stores simultaneously, rather than absorbing losses from just a handful while the brand slowly found its footing. The contrast with what actually succeeded in the exact same market makes the failure even clearer. Gloria Jean's, a rival coffee chain operating in the same country during the same period, built a genuinely successful footprint of more than 400 stores, serving over 35 million customers annually, largely by doing the one thing Starbucks failed to do: tailoring its menu specifically to Australian tastes, leaning into espresso-based drinks and local specialty options rather than importing an unmodified American lineup wholesale. The lesson embedded in that contrast is almost uncomfortably simple. It wasn't that Australians rejected coffee chains as a concept entirely. They rejected one specific chain that refused to adapt to them. By 2008, the financial reality had become impossible to ignore, though the timing did give Starbucks some cover. The global financial crisis was hitting nearly every retail business that year, and Starbucks was simultaneously closing around 600 underperforming stores across the United States. At the same time, it pulled back sharply in Australia. Even so, industry observers at the time widely noted that the Australian retreat represented something more specific than ordinary recession-driven store closures. It was a brand fundamentally failing to connect with a market it had badly misjudged from the very beginning, one where the surrounding financial crisis simply accelerated a collapse that was already well underway. Here's the part of the story that rarely makes it into the retelling, though. Starbucks didn't fully abandon Australia after 2008. The company has since taken a noticeably different, more cautious approach, gradually reopening a smaller number of locations, concentrated heavily in shopping malls and tourist-heavy areas across cities like Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and the Gold Coast, deliberately targeting international visitors, particularly tourists from the United States and China, who already carry brand familiarity and expectations shaped somewhere else entirely. Rather than trying to convert loyal, coffee-sophisticated locals a second time, Starbucks essentially repositioned itself to serve a completely different customer, one who wanted a familiar, predictable experience, specifically because they weren't Australian. So here's the pattern running through this entire blueprint. Starbucks didn't fail in Australia because Australians dislike coffee, or because the brand itself is fundamentally weak. It failed because it walked into one of the most mature, most sophisticated, most fiercely loyal café cultures on the planet, and applied the exact same standardized playbook that had worked almost everywhere else, without pausing to genuinely understand what the local market actually wanted, or asking whether speed and consistency were even the values that mattered most to the customers it was trying to win over. Every other major mismatch on this list, the oversweetened menu, the premium pricing, the rapid overexpansion, traces back to that same root failure to adapt. If this changed how you think about what it actually takes for a global brand to succeed in a genuinely different market, let us know in the comments which specific misstep on this list surprised you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to Faulty Blueprint, because next time, we're opening the file on another company that assumed its winning formula would translate anywhere, and found out the hard way that it didn't.